Welcome to One Insight. My name is Rich Litvin. I grew up in London and I now live in LA. And this is a podcast for extraordinary top performers. You see, I've coached some of the most successful and talented people on the planet. I see what most people cannot see, and I dare to say what most people wouldn't dare to say. And what I know about success is that on the other side of it, it can actually be lonely. You can feel like more of an imposter the more successful you become. And when you're the most interesting person in the room, you're actually in the wrong room. I coach around insight. Life looks one way, something happens, the world looks different, and your entire world changes. It can happen in an instant. And this podcast is called One Insight because a single insight can change everything.
In a minute, I'm going to coach Fiona. And I'm coaching Fiona around this question she has about she's rather unique, she's rather different. How does she explain that to her clients? What does she do with this idea that she's unique and unusual? How does she tell stories because they won't resonate with people? And we end up creating a piece of intellectual property, a tool that she can use to enroll clients and to coach clients. And as you listen in, I think you might find that it's a tool that you can use for yourself too, because it's not distinct to Fiona, but it is a very powerful piece of intellectual capital I draw out of her. So enjoy. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Rich.
Hey, it's nice to see you here today. I'm looking forward to working with you. And I have no idea, I said before the call, I don't need to know in advance what we're going to work on because I like this to be real. This isn't staged. What would make this a really special session for you?
I think what would make it really special is to kind of dig into my fairly unique and unusual career and life and how that is relevant to the people that I want to coach.
Mm-hmm.
How do they see themselves in my story when my story is so not normal, quite unique?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is nobody hears your story. They hear their story in your story.
Yeah.
So worry less about that than you think you need to.
Okay.
You've got a unique story about where you've worked, what you've done. But underneath that, there'll be some themes that we'll see that other people will say, oh, yes, me too. For example, one thing that really strikes me, because I know you spent so much time living and working in India, that I'm going to hazard a guess that you have a deep-seated desire and excitement around adventure.
Yeah. Intrepid is the word that resonates with me.
Nice. What's your distinction around intrepid versus adventure?
Intrepid is kind of that bold, doing things a little bit unusual, that is maybe a bit more daring than adventure.
Mm-hmm.
It's this is quite scary, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's not a safe adventure. Intrepid is kind of that bold adventure, I think.
When I was 21, 22, I went to live in Botswana in Southern Africa, and I taught there in a little village in the north of the country, a rural village.
Mm.
And about 10 years later, maybe a bit longer, my brother got married and he went to Botswana on his honeymoon, and they had the same place as I went to, but they had an adventure. I had what you would call an intrepid experience. I get that distinction.
Yeah, exactly that.
So what we've already drawn out is, with one single word, there's a filter for the kind of people you love to work with. I imagine it's going to be exciting and inspiring to work with intrepid people who are bold and unusual in what they're up to, what they've done in the past or what they desire in the future.
Yeah. And that might not necessarily involve they want to go traveling. It's what is their intrepid journey, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tell me another value that you have. What's another value of yours?
Freedom.
Mm-hmm. And how's that played out in your life? Give me an example of where that's been a value that's played out.
In traveling so much and always I've worked for myself for years. I remember reading a book and thinking, oh my goodness, I would make such a terrible employee now.
Mhm.
It's that every employee's nightmare is losing a job, and every entrepreneur's nightmare is having to get one.
Yeah. That's great.
So my freedom to construct my life the way I want it to be, to work the hours I want to work, to be in the places I want to be in, to work, and I have a 19-year-old son, so that bringing up my son made life quite stationary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly from when he was 8. We kind of had to hunker down into education and what have you. And I feel that yearning again for being able to be wherever I want to be, and still being able to work.
One of the things that I see very common in entrepreneurs is they leave the corporate world or working for someone else to become an entrepreneur, a business owner, because they have this deep desire for freedom. And within 6 months to a year, they have far less freedom than they ever had, because there's no more demanding boss than the person who sits in your seat and wears your shoes.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we really help entrepreneurs with, if we're coaches, is giving them back the freedom that they craved in the first place.
Yeah, and I think what I've learned is that to have that freedom, there has to be some structure.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time, my freedom was that all-encompassing freedom of, I don't want any structure, I don't want any rules. And I found that quite limiting, because it meant that I couldn't actually commit to anything very much. So understanding that element of structure in order to have freedom, I think is quite an important part of really enjoying that freedom, of actually really having it.
I think it's a really great catch. It's what most people miss. The distinction I have around freedom is there's freedom from, which is what most people live in. If only I didn't have this boss, this organization, this wife, this husband. We want freedom from. We may move into freedom to, oh, I really want to create this next. Here's my business desire. Here's my dream. And behind all of that is a third distinction, and it's pure freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me another of your values. There's being intrepid. There's freedom. Give me one more.
There's something around consistency and showing up, which I know might sound like it flies in the face of freedom, but there's that honourable, decent, by your word kind of trust, I suppose.
Oh, I like that. It's counterintuitive, but it doesn't fly in the face of it. My wife's a jazz musician and an improviser by background. But if you want to improvise, there are rules in which you improvise. If you're doing training, one of the rules is say yes to everything. If someone says, oh, so you're a dog, and you don't go, no, I'm a cat. You roll with what is. And if you're a jazz musician, there are certain rules, because outside of here, it's not jazz, it's R&B or it's pop music. Within these boundaries, you have the freedom to really create in a powerful way. So actually, boundaries and freedom really go together. Without boundaries, there's freedom and there's something really missing. So here's what I've heard. I've got 3 overlapping circles on the piece of paper in front of me. There's being intrepid, there's freedom, and there's trust. And at the heart of that is you.
Yeah. So those are the things I talk about.
I'd start there. Yeah. So if someone says, who do you work with, Fiona, or what do you do? You say, well, look, let me pull out a piece of paper. And you scribble down 3 circles and you write these 3 words. And let me tell you why these 3 words are important to me, and always have been. These have been part of my life for my entire life. Here's what intrepid means. Here's what freedom means. Here's what trust means. And then you go quiet. And some people will say, oh, that's lovely. And they're not your people. And the ones who go, oh my God, Right. Yeah. Freedom. Like I craved it, which is why I got this job and I'm now the CEO of the company. And everyone thinks I've got more freedom than anyone else in the company, but I've got less freedom than anybody else. Or intrepid. Yeah. I used to have such a need for adventure. And then I became a mother and adventure's gone out of my life.
Mm.
And you'll get interesting conversations from these three words.
Yeah. And that's interesting actually, because I mainly work with guys, and all of them, when I talk to them, they all come out with, I used to be a musician, a racing car driver. I used to race bikes, whatever it was, and they don't anymore. They gave it up for career, for what they, I guess, for what they thought life wanted from them.
Well, so often it's very common. We go into a career because we think, oh, I've got this need to travel and see the world. I have this big desire for freedom. If I make enough money in this career, I'll be able to do that. And we misunderstand what happens because 20 years later, our soul is sucked from us. We have no time to do any of those things that we used to crave.
And we've got stuck in the comfort of that. And maybe the intrepid spirit is no longer there.
So where you might like to play with this is when you have your Venn diagram, and you have the three overlapping circles, there's three places where they overlap. What does it look like to live an intrepid life and have freedom but no trust? What if you have a life that has freedom and trust, but you're no longer intrepid? And you can start to map out what this looks like. And some of your people are going to go, oh my God, yeah, that's the one I'm missing. Or I'm missing both of these.
Oh, that's brilliant. I like that. So
what we've just done is create a piece of intellectual property for you. This is a tool that you can use. What we've created is intellectual capital, which will become intellectual property if you choose to use it as a tool and so on with your clients. And you'll hone it over time and start first run at it. But there's real power when you start to create tools and intellectual property like this, because you create an interesting conversation. But what do? Well, let's have a look. And you draw this out on a piece of paper and say, hey, where do you come on this diagram? Now you've got them engaged over here instead of this conversation about, well, what do you mean you're a coach? And that's not an enlivening conversation. But this tool gets them reflecting on them and their lives and what they want and what's missing. And now you've got something interesting to talk about.
And that's brilliant, because I was talking today to a client, and I was talking about being self-centered, and not rather than self-centered, but centered in the self. And I was saying to her, I said, you remember those balls when you were a kid and they weighted them a little off center. And so when you roll the ball along, it kind of goes all over the place. And it's about getting that weight back in the center. So with that diagram you described there, you have got that central kind of ikigai piece.
So you give a label to the center. In the center, you are literally self-centered. Now you've got another piece to add to your intellectual capital that you're creating. And and over time, those words might change. You might add others, take things away. But here we've got your first piece of intellectual property, and a really great way to create clients, to serve clients. It's really cool.
Yeah, I love it. It's really exciting. I really love it.
And I think we're there.
Stories that can then feed into that.
Perfect.
All those life experiences. And
even more than your stories, you ask their stories.
Yeah.
Tell me about a time when you had. Here's one of my stories about freedom. I did it with you. I modeled it for you. I mentioned about what it was like for me understanding intrepid versus adventure with my story from my time in Botswana.
Yeah.
So telling a story to someone as a way to lead them into telling their own story.
Lovely. Cool. Really lovely.
Thanks.
Elegant.
It is. Yeah. And look, at some point you'll get a graphic designer and they'll draw it out for you in a nice way. But right now, scribble it out every time on a piece of paper. There's something really cool about sitting with someone and creating with them in a conversation.
Yeah. When we can meet in person again.
You can just have a Zoom. I've got my 3 overlapping circles on a piece of paper. So
you just hold it up to the screen. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona.
For most of human history, it wasn't called coaching, it was called leadership. And it's what I love to do, to coach people, to lead people, and to mess with people's thinking. If you'd like more of this, or if you'd like to learn more about our community of extraordinary top performers, go to richlitvin.com/oneinsight.